Founded in 1729, Arlington Street continues today as a gathering place for progressive people of faith in the greater Boston area and beyond. We are located at the corner of Arlington and Boylston Streets, across from the Public Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.
A few weeks ago, when I opened the summer worship schedule Google Doc that contained the slate of dates for summer preaching, I was immediately drawn to the idea of preaching on July 5th, an early summer Sunday in very close proximity to July 4th. Our nation's birthday, and this one, 2026, is of course particularly significant. This monumental star-spangled holiday celebration of our 250th fight for freedom from an English king and tyrant. Freedom, I thought to myself, I could craft a meaningful and timely sermon about freedom, remembering how steeped my recent divinity school education was in notions of freedom and education, emancipation, deliverance, exodus, salvation, awakening, and on and on and on. The human struggle for freedom seems to be one of the most reliable and consistent narrative struggles of the human condition. What does it mean to be free? The word freedom comes from an Old English freedom, meaning the state of being unencumbered, self-determination, free will, emancipation from slavery or deliverance. Over time, though, it gathered more explicitly political meanings like exemption from arbitrary or despotic control, civil liberties, and even possession of a certain particular privilege. The history of the word freedom is pregnant with possibility and danger. Freedom has always carried both the glory of a universal promise and the dark underbelly of an uneven practice. It can mean liberation from domination, but it can also mean privileges possessed by some and denied to others. So when we ask, what does it mean to be free, we are also asking, whose freedom counts as liberty? Whose freedom has been treated as optional? And what kind of freedom is large enough to be shared by a whole community? Remembering our tender and unlikely birth in 1776, the American Revolution was fought, at least in the patriots' own framing, as a struggle of freedom from empire, taxation, domination, and imposed authority. The Declaration of Independence gave the world luminous language about equality, liberty, consent, and human dignity. But the country that declared freedom from tyranny was also built through slavery, indigenous dispossession, patriarchy, exclusion, and the denial of freedom to many, many, many people. It was only a narrow freedom only for land-owning white males. This contradiction is not a footnote. This is a part of the American story. To love a country faithfully, we must remember, is not to flatter it. It is to refuse to lie about it. It is to grieve what must be grieved, honor what must be honored, repair what can be repaired, and to refuse to surrender the word freedom to those who would use it as a weapon. The American story, celebrated yesterday, is an unfinished one of freedom declared and freedom denied. Freedom from tyranny was the declared beginning. Freedom for justice, dignity, belonging, and repair remains the unfinished work, even after 250 years of fighting to be free. Our very own beloved Arlington Street Church has been fighting another good fight for freedom since 1729. When a group of Scots-Irish Presbyterians, many of them fleeing religious persecution in Northern Ireland, came to Boston and found themselves unwelcome again. Boston's Puritan establishment, well ensconced in power, would not allow them to build a meeting house. So they gathered instead in a converted barn on Long Lane, and they became known as the Church of the Presbyterian Strangers, a name that sounds almost like a wound and a blessing at the same time. Strangers, outsiders, people without the freedom to assemble, to worship, to belong, and to become a community the way they had hoped. Their origin story matters for us, especially on a weekend when our nation is telling stories about freedom, because the Presbyterian Strangers were certainly seeking freedom from something: freedom from persecution, freedom from religious exclusion, freedom from the narrowness of an establishment that could not imagine their way of worship as legitimate. But their story, which, let's remember, is ours too, their story didn't stop there. Their story was also a story of seeking freedom for something. Freedom for conscience, freedom for worship, freedom for covenant, freedom for the sacred and difficult work of building community where none had been offered. Because freedom from is necessary. Sometimes it's urgent, the most urgent of jobs. Freedom from tyranny, violence, shame, coercion, domination, from every force that says you may not be fully human here. But freedom from is not the whole story of liberation. Eventually, the question becomes, what is freedom for? What will we build to carry us forward as we break the bonds that deny our humanity? The Presbyterian Strangers did not only escape constraint, they made a church. They gathered in a barn and began to practice belonging. They turned exile into covenant. They took their outsider status and built a living tradition that would, over time, keep widening the circle of who could belong. And the story is still unfolding, unfinished and necessary. That little barn-born congregation of ours later became Federal Street Church, and now, of course, Arlington Street Church. And our history has long been shaped by freedom seekers and freedom makers. From its 1729 origins, seeking religious liberty, to its early public witness against slavery, and later commitments to suffrage for women, civil rights, peace, and dissent, to its current day struggle for queer liberation and care, this beloved congregation has not treated freedom as merely private or abstract, but as something to be practiced in public. Freedom for conscience and covenant and embodied dignity, freedom for love of all colors, and freedom for the unfinished work of becoming whole together. So when we ask, what does it mean to be free? We're asking a question this congregation has been living for almost 3 centuries. Not perfectly, mind you, not completely without contradiction, but faithfully enough to keep returning to the question, freedom from what? Freedom for whom? Freedom for the sake of what? From the Presbyterian Strangers in a barn on Long Lane to the public witness of this sanctuary today, Arlington Street's history reminds us that freedom is not only a door we walk out of, it's also home for every body that we build together. And every public story of freedom eventually must find its way into a human body. A country can declare freedom, a church can practice freedom, but a human being must learn somehow how to inhabit freedom in the tender, complicated, ordinary places of a life. When I reflect on my own life experiences, I recognize the times I've been most afraid are actually the times I was also struggling to make myself free. Coming out later in life, of course, was one battle for freedom. And losing my hair, which preceded that personal struggle, was another. These struggles for freedom were interconnected, another freedom from and freedom for. And neither of these freedom stories felt at first like freedom at all. They felt like exposure, grief, risk, the terrifying possibility of becoming visible in a way that I could not fully control. For much of my life, I had carried old stories in my body about beauty and worth and control and what it means to be seen. And a few years ago, when my hair began to fall out, which was the unexpected and terrifying onset of an autoimmune condition called alopecia, I was frightened and embarrassed. And I went into full battle mode. I tried to fix it, cover it, manage it, solve it, hide it. And the story I was telling myself became brutally simple. If my body behaved according to the standards of my culture, I was good. If it did not, I was broken. I was defective. Hats and headbands protected me for a while, and then as my son's wedding approached, I knew I could no longer pretend. So I got a wig. And for a while, the wig was my freedom. It was my freedom from my baldness and freedom from my suffering. The wig was mercy. And it was also beauty and protection and a friend and a cover. It helped me cross a threshold I did not yet know I couldn't cross alone. But slowly something in me began to shift in private, on early morning walks and at home in the quiet. I began to befriend my suffering, befriend my baldness, and it felt strangely and surprisingly empowering. And eventually, in rather short order, there came a tipping point and I took the wig off. I still didn't have hair, but it was time. Because for me, freedom was not getting my old self back. Freedom was not the absence of vulnerability. Freedom was the choice not to let shame decide the terms of my vulnerability. Freedom was the choice not to hide. And this is what I mean when I say that freedom from and freedom for go hand in hand. I was seeking freedom from shame, freedom from hiding, freedom from the narrow stories that had taught me my worth depended on how my body performed beauty. But I was also seeking freedom for something, it turned out. Freedom for truth, freedom for embodiment, freedom for tenderness toward myself, freedom for becoming more fully myself. And that, I think, is one of the deep spiritual meanings of freedom that I want to talk about today, because it's not simply to escape what has bound us, though sometimes escape is necessary, but to become free is to create something new, a new story for your country, for your community, or for yourself. It's unfinished work, to be sure, and it's always work that is necessary. So on this Sunday morning, July 5th, after the fireworks and the flags and the speeches and the parades, after all the stories America and ourselves tell about freedom, we gather here to ask again, what does it mean to be free? Are we free if our neighbors are afraid? Are we free if only some people get to be safe? Are we free if some bodies are treated as threats? Are we free if truth becomes optional? Freedom from and freedom for belong together. Freedom from tyranny must become freedom for justice. Freedom from domination must become freedom for dignity. Freedom from fear must become freedom for courage. Freedom from shame must become freedom for truth. And freedom from exclusion must become freedom for covenant. Freedom from the stories that diminish us must become freedom for the sacred and difficult work of becoming whole together. As a country, we're still learning this. Still learning that freedom cannot be real if it only belongs to some. Still learning that liberty, when hoarded as privilege, is not freedom at all. We're still learning that a nation's story must be large enough to tell the truth about its wounds, its contradictions, and its unfinished promises. As a church, we're still learning this too. A faith community does not measure freedom only by what has been promised. We measure it by who's still waiting for the promise. From the Presbyterian strangers gathered on Long Lane to every generation that has widened the circle since, and it's been many, many generations. We ask again and again, what is our freedom for? And we've been answering. Our freedom is for conscience, worship, covenant, for public witness, for queer love, for embodied dignity and repair, for the ever unfinished work of widening belonging. And as individual human beings, as bodies and souls trying to be whole, we're still learning this too. In our tender places, in the mirror, in the closet, in the diagnosis, in the family secret, in the grief, in the aging body, the changing body, the place where shame once told us we had no right to be seen. Freedom is not always fireworks. Sometimes it's trembling, or the crick in your voice that Padraig talked about. Sometimes freedom is telling the truth with your voice shaking. Sometimes freedom is walking into the world without your old armor. And it's choosing again and again not to let fear write the story, not to let shame write the story, or cruelty, or domination, or despair. None of these can write the story. We need to write a story so that we may be free from fear and free for courage, from shame and for truth, from domination and for justice, from isolation and for love, free from every narrow story that diminishes our worth, and free for the sacred and difficult work of becoming whole together. May it be so. Amen. As we prepare to leave our beloved sanctuary of sharing today and walk into our week ahead, let's hold our country's recent birthday tenderly in our memory, knowing that the work of freedom remains unfinished and necessary for our country, for our community, and for ourselves. Let's aim our hearts in the direction of freedom and dedicate ourselves to the writing and the rewriting in our own particular voice, a new story of what it means to be free in our nation's arms, in our congregation's arms, and in one another's arms. A story honest enough to hold our grief, brave enough to demand justice, tender enough to heal shame, spacious enough to include all of us, and loving enough to become repair and wholeness. Love is the spirit of this congregation. May love hold us all until we meet again. Let us keep this faith, beloveds, and pass it on. The service begins when the service ends. I love you. Amen.
2, 3. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. For your people are my people. Your people are
We are located at the corner of Arlington and Boylston Streets, across from the Public Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.